Welcome. Today we're going to break down a really detailed guide to Santa Barbara's top kindergarten options for the 2025 school year. If you're a parent in the area, you know this is a huge decision, so let's get you the key info.
So the guide we're exploring today really frames Santa Barbara as a one-of-a-kind place for education. It suggests that the whole vibe of the city, that mix of coastal living and a real community feel, creates this amazing environment where schools can focus on both getting kids outdoors and achieving academic excellence.
And that's the big question, isn't it? With so many options out there, it can feel pretty overwhelming. This is a massive decision for any parent, so let's get organized and create a clear roadmap using what's in this guide.
Here's our game plan. We'll start with what the school scene is like here, then we'll look at the 5 key things the guide used to rate them. We'll compare public versus private, shine a spotlight on a few specific schools from their list, and then wrap up with your next steps.
Okay, let's dive right in. To really get started, we need to understand what makes the school scene here so special, at least according to the source material we're looking at.
The guide makes this interesting point that parents in Santa Barbara aren't just looking for one thing. They want that perfect balance, right? They're looking for strong academics, for sure, but not at the cost of a warm, nurturing environment that helps kids grow emotionally and socially. It's really about finding a school that can do both.
So, how did the source actually put together its list of top schools? Well, it wasn't random. They used 5 key factors to look at and rank every single kindergarten program.
And this is basically the scorecard they used. It starts with the absolute basics, academics, and then it adds in these other layers that really shape the day-to-day experience, like student-teacher ratios and new creative ways of teaching. And finally, it looks at the big picture, the school's community feel and the overall value you get for the cost. It gives us a really solid way to compare schools that might seem totally different on the surface.
And that evaluation system leads us right to the first huge fork in the road for most families. Do you go public or do you go private? So let's look at the main trade-offs that the guide points out.
The guide really presents this as a classic choice. On one hand, you've got public schools. They're tuition-free, and they're deeply connected to the local community. On the other hand, you have private schools, which often highlight their smaller classes and very specific programs. But that comes with a pretty big price tag.
And whoa, this chart really puts that financial difference into perspective, doesn't it? The guide's data shows public school at zero cost, of course. A mid-range private school is floating around $15,000, but then the top-ranked private option jumps all the way up to $50,000 a year. That is a massive factor for almost every family.
Okay, to make all this a bit more real, we're going to spotlight 3 completely different kinds of schools from the guide's top 10 list. Each one really shows a different way of doing kindergarten.
Okay, first up, and this is some pretty important context, the guide we're actually analyzing was created by Alpha School. And maybe not surprisingly, they rank themselves number 1. According to them, they deserve that top spot because of their innovative, non-religious, mastery-based learning model.
So if we dig into the details, the guide points to a super low 8-to-1 student-teacher ratio and this unique 2-hour learning model. The idea is that kids do intense, project-based work on the core subjects and it's mastery-based, which just means they don't move on until they've totally nailed a concept. This approach, plus that tiny ratio, is how they justify that pretty high tuition.
All right, next up, coming in at number 2 in the guide is Montecito Union School. This one is presented as one of the best tuition-free public options you can find in the area.
And right away, you see a totally different profile here. The guide highlights this school for its excellent academic results, especially in reading and math, and for its great community feel, all for free. The student-teacher ratio is a bit higher at 13-to-1, but that's still really good for a public school. And for our last spotlight, let's look at a school with a completely different philosophy. Ranked number 7 in this guide is the Santa Barbara Waldorf School. So, this school represents that alternative private school path. The guide focuses on its Waldorf philosophy, which is all about developing the whole child, their creativity, their imagination. And what that means in the classroom is a curriculum packed with arts, music, and a lot of learning through play. Its tuition also falls right into that mid-range private category we saw earlier. Okay, so you've seen these 3 very different school models. What now? How do you actually move forward and make this incredibly important decision for your own family?
The guide essentially encourages you to take its own evaluation checklist and use it for yourself. It really boils down to asking your family these key questions about your budget, what kind of learning environment you want, how important class size is, and what teaching style just feels right for your kid.
And this right here, this is a super important piece of advice, pulled straight from the guide's FAQ. The best way to get a feel for a school is to just go see it. Don't just rely on lists or what you read online. Reach out and schedule a visit.
Because at the end of the day, after you've looked at all the guides and read all the lists, it all comes down to this. The best school isn't just a name at the top of a list. It's the place where your child is going to be the happiest, the most excited to learn, and the best supported to just thrive. So what does that look like for your family? That's the real question you've got to answer.